They say HDZero is good, but how good is it really? Well, today we find out. I have 3 of my favorite drones right here. I have a DJI drone, an HDZero drone, and finally an analog drone right here. So let's take these 3 for a flight and see which one is right for you. With that said, welcome to the 200mW VTX challenge. Okay, so we're back from our flight test and these drones did an amazing job. So let's talk about how we're gonna conduct this VTX challenge. We have 6 categories and we're gonna score each system between 1 and 3 points. At the end of the challenge, we're gonna add the points up and see which one has the highest score. So with that said, let's start with our first category. Now the first category is size and form factor. We can also include weight in that. Let's start with the analog VTX, and this is arguably the most versatile size and form factor among the 3. And these VTX comes in many shapes and sizes, just like this large Mamba VTX right here, down to this tiny, and I mean really tiny VTX here. This is the TBS Unified Pro Nano on this Baby Hawk 2. So this thing is really small and compact and has really good output. So with that said, the analog VTX gets 3 points. Now coming along to the HDZero VTX, they're a little bit larger, but follow a similar pattern with all being around the same size. Now this has been a recent release of a 1S VTX by HDZero. It's a little bit smaller than the Whip VTX, just a little bit thinner, but has pretty much the same dimensions. Now these VTX are not as versatile in shape and size as the analog, and because of that, this one here gets 2 points. Now coming to the DJI, I chuckle a little bit, but the DJI system here, there's really only one shape, one size. You just buy this VTX and it's all gonna be the same. Now, although the dimensions as far as length and width is adequate, there's nothing really smaller than this, and it's really, really thick. So that's its downside, is how thick this thing is. And if you opt for the full DJI Air system with the DVR, then it's actually a little bit bigger. So because of that, the DJI system gets 1 point. Our next category is image clarity. Let's start off with the analog system. Now, we know what analog is. And analog, for the most part, is just okay. It reminds me of those cathode ray tube TVs of the 1990s. It works, it does a job, it's in color, but you know you can get better. It's pretty much standard definition. And because of that, it gets 1 point. Now moving on to the HDZero system, the image clarity is significantly better than analog. Now the image on here is good. You never question what you're looking at. When you look through the goggles, you can see images and you're like, okay, I can see what I'm looking at. Now the 720p on here is pretty good. There is gonna be an option for 1080p in the future, but this thing here is just good enough. There's really no qualms about it. And when you pair that to 60 frames per second and a very low latency system, the image coming from this is really, really good actually. Now coming over to the DJI system, this is a system where it really impresses you and also disappoints you at the same time. In one sense, you're flying and you're like, this image is clear. We're not worthy of how clear this image is. You're going pretty far and you know it looks just as good 1 feet or 1,000 feet away. This image is good. In the next sense, you're flying and you get some delayed response and sometimes you get some blotchiness in the corner. So in that sense, it's not so good. But for the most part, the DJI system is the clearest of the bunch, and that's all we care about in this category. And for that, this one here gets 3 points. Our next category is range, and let's start off with the analog drone here. Now the range on this is pretty good. This is the system that actually started the whole, FPV system. So this thing has decent range. Typically with the 200mW VTX, with a linear antenna, you're gonna get around 300 to 500 meters. And I've gotten that especially with this setup right here. And for that, this one here gets 1 point. Now coming up to the HDZero system, the range on this is pretty good and sometimes even further than DJI. But in my test at 200 milliwatts, this one came middle of the pack. You know, the range was pretty decent, but after I got a little bit of distance, especially when there's obstacles in the way, then this one will break up a little bit faster than the DJI. So because of that, the HDZero system gets 2 points. Now coming to the DJI system, this one performed well, actually too well. This thing outperformed these by a long shot. It's almost like this VTX was not even trying, or it was not even challenged. At 200 milliwatts, this thing just worked well, no breakup. Obviously there's an increase in latency, but the image coming back to my goggles was just as good as if it was right next to me. And because of that, it gets 3 points. The next category is breakup and breakup pattern. Let's start off with the analog drone here. Now, this has been in the market for a long time, no difference here. So we kind of know what to expect. Now, in my experience, this thing breaks up pretty predictably. It starts off with the colors going and coming. It fades, then it goes to black and white, then you see some more static. And then you can either adjust, change, even to the point if you do ultimately go too low and lose all your signal, you can immediately go back up and then probably regain your signal. So with that said, this thing here is predictable, and because of that, it does get 2 points. Now, HDZero is a digital system, and obviously they're trying to mimic, or they designed it to mimic, the characteristics of an analog VTX when it comes to breakup. So there is some breakup in there, and it's pretty unique and a little bit different, because where you have no information, there's complete static, and the other parts of the image that has the information coming back to your goggles, it's clear like you have 100% signal. So that's pretty cool. That's good for negotiating some areas. The part that's interesting is the way it breaks up, so how sudden it breaks up. Sometimes you can go from it having some speckles to just it going out in a half second, or pretty quickly actually. So because of that, it's a little bit less predictable, and sometimes when you do lose your signal completely, unlike the analog, it's really hard to regain the signal. So if I'm in the same situation where it's getting more staticky and then all of a sudden it just goes to complete static, if I do punch out and get higher altitude, sometimes it may take more time to regain the image back to my goggles, if you can even get it in the first place. So because of that, this one here gets 1 point. As far as DJI, the breakup on here is, let's just say, it's non-existent, honestly. What it does do, it does trade, you know, the breakup, or if you want to call it breakup, for latency and just delay in the image, just mushiness. Especially in this case, you'll see some blurred or mushy image, typically on the side left and right of center, which is a way to keep the center focus, and then the information on the side is a little bit mushy. So you will notice that, but as far as breakup, there really isn't any breakup, just a drop in resolution. So because of that, the DJI system does get 3 points for no breakup at all. The fifth category is OSD support, and let's start with the analog system. Now, this is what started this whole, you know, OSD thing, having telemetry in your goggles. And obviously the analog system does have that. This is pretty much the standard for that. And yeah, it just works. You can get all your telemetry in there, and it is supported. Anything from images to your coordinates, you know, your ground speed, is all displayed on your goggles. Really no gripes about it. So because of that, this one here, the analog system does get 2 points for OSD support. Now coming over to the HDZero system. Now this thing started off without OSD support, but as of recent, this does support canvas mode. So just like the analog system, you can put pretty much anything on your goggles as far as telemetry, GPS coordinates. And because of the clarity and the consistency of the image, this one here gets 3 points. Now coming to the DJI system, this may or may not have OSD support. Now, we've always wanted OSD support, as I said before, coming from analog. This was the first digital system, and a lot of pilots was just used to that, which makes sense. There's a lot of information from the analog system, and we wanted that in the DJI system. Now, there was rumors that, you know, DJI and or Caddx was gonna promise that and bring that to the DJI system. But here we are present day, and we still do not have OSD or canvas mode support for DJI. So with that said, this one here gets 1 point. The last category is price and affordability. Let's start off with the analog system, and this is the oldest and most mature system of the three. So with that said, this will be the cheapest of the three when it comes to price point, and we're talking anywhere between $12 and $100. I saw some today for 12 bucks, and the price can go up based upon the size, capabilities. Something like this, Mamba VTX is a little bit more expensive, and they can go all the way up to $100. So if you really want something affordable, you can get that easily with the analog system. Because of that, the price point is good here, and it gets 3 points. Coming to the HDZero system, it's piggybacking off the analog system. Now the price point isn't as cheap as analog as you would suspect because this is digital after all, but it's not as expensive as the DJI system. Now these things can range anywhere between $45 and $100 depending on the size capability of the VTX. Because of that, this will get 2 points for price and affordability. Now coming to DJI, this is the most expensive of the three, and this is, you can think of as the Rolls Royce of the VTX Royal. This thing comes in at $100 whether you want to or not. It's just what it is. The technology is kind of proprietary. It does command a higher price tag. Now for that, you do get high quality. It does work. You have really high quality, and I guess DJI commands that, and people are paying for that VTX. So it's pretty cool. You are gonna pay that price whether you want 200 milliwatts or 1200 milliwatts. And because of that, this gets 1 point. So with that last category covered, let's tally up the points and see which one has the highest score. Now let's start off with the analog. The analog scored 12 total points. As far as the HDZero, it also scored 12 total points. Now coming to DJI, we have a total of 12 total points as well. So a three-way tie, 12 points across the board. So what does that mean? Does that mean they're all the same? Does that mean that the analog is going to perform just as good as the DJI? Why am I paying 3-4 times as much for this if they're all scoring the same? Well, unfortunately, the points in this case means nothing. It just proves that each VTX has their own strengths and weaknesses. You can't really expect a DJI drone or VTX to do the same thing as an analog drone or the same as a HDZero drone. Now that seems like a simple answer and a cop-out for the results here, but honestly, it gets a little more tricky when you want 3 or more qualities from your VTX. That's where it gets a little bit more complicated. Now, as I said before, if you want something that's cheap, obviously analog is the way. If you want something light, analog is the way. If you want quality, then DJI is the way. But what if you want numerous qualities? What if you want high quality but lightweight or small size? Well, DJI just isn't going to cut it. That's where you have to really look into the results and see what applies to you. In that case, well, HDZero is lighter and it has really decent quality. Probably not the quality of DJI, but you do get the quality better than analog, and it's lighter than DJI. So it gets a little bit tricky. Now, as I said, it gets even more complicated when you want 3 or more qualities in a VTX. So say for example, I want a high quality image, I want a lightweight package, and I want it cheap. Well, that's 3 things, and DJI has good quality. Not that lightweight, but it's lightweight, but it's definitely not cheap. So you can't fulfill all 3 there. HDZero on the other hand is the closest to that. It is good quality image, it's a little bit lighter than DJI, and it is also less expensive than DJI. But it's still expensive or more expensive than analog. Analog now, it is lightweight, it is cheap, but the image quality is not there. It's kind of hard to get all 3. It's almost similar to the engineering triangle where you have, quality, reliability, and low price. You have to choose 2. You can't get all 3. Now, if you take a look at the score here, one thing that's really interesting here, although you see all of the system having 12 points, let's look at how they got the 12 points. Now, let's start with the DJI system. As you can see, DJI had the most amount of 3-point scores, and they also have the highest number of 1-point scores. That means DJI does what they do well, and what they don't do well, they do it horribly. So in this case, as you can see, the size and form factor isn't as good as the others. OSD support, they're not really good at that. And then the price, obviously, is expensive. They're terrible at price. But when it comes to image resolution, clarity, what else? Range is good, and breakup pattern, then they do that very well. Now, analog, on the other hand, it's okay. It has some 1s in there, there's some 2s in there, and some 3s, and that's kind of expected from the first system, and obviously the other systems have the advantage of piggybacking off the analog system, making this better. Now, HDZero is a little bit different if you look at the scores. So as you can see, the HDZero got the most middle of the road scores, which makes this one here the jack of all trades, but the master of none. It can't do anything too particularly well, but it does everything pretty good, pretty acceptable. That's really good, and since this is a new system, hopefully in the future they'll improve on the quality and feature set of the HDZero system. So in conclusion, which VTX is right for you? Well, unfortunately, only you can decide that, but the straight answer is if you want quality, DJI is the way to go. If you want price, affordability, and lightweight, then analog is the way to go. If you want a mixture of the two, just a middle of the road system, then HDZero is the system for you. Now, if you want to see how these two systems here work, I've done complete reviews on DJI and the HDZero system, talking about the components and what you need to get started if you want to go into the HDZero system. I'll leave this video link right here. So thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.